Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Seed Talk. My name is Layne, and today we're going to be talking about some tips for buying seed. In this excerpt from episode 11, which was our seed storage episode, Lisa and I discuss how long seeds last, seeds with particularly short shelf lives, and how much seed to order depending on your intended sowing method. These are some great tips to keep in mind as you're perusing seed catalogs and deciding what to order and how much. Enjoy! So how long does seed typically last, and what is seed viability?
So it varies greatly from, I just actually read this past weekend or watched on a video, a seed grower talking about tomato seeds and just how many years they can last. I mean, just over a decade or more. And obviously, if you store the seed in its conditions, it can really have a long life. The problem is that not many of us provide those conditions most often in our households, right? And so that keeps all those wonderful things you just explained, that keeps all of those things just sitting there ready to wait to jump into action once you actually plant that little seed.
Yes, a seed's longevity depends on a lot of things. It depends on what plant are you talking about? What type of seed coat does that particular seed have? Was the seed harvested when it was fully mature or was it immature? And how has it been handled and how has it been stored? So there's a lot of things that can affect the shelf life of a seed. And viability just refers to the ability of a seed to germinate readily and develop into a strong, healthy, vigorous seedling. And I also wanted to mention that seed vigor is a different thing than the germination rate. So a seed can actually lose a lot of its vigor and still be able to germinate. So if you've ever had really old seed lying around and you've tried to germinate it and maybe you got 10 sprouts out of 100 seeds, well, that seed, chances are that it's lost a lot of its vigor and those seedlings are most likely going to be weaker. And in turn, the plants a lot of times might be weaker. I know, Lisa, you tend to discard trays if they haven't met a certain germination percentage. Isn't that right?
It is very true because we know that the puny plants or puny transplants typically lead us to puny garden plants. And when you have limited space like I do, why not just start with the very best you can?
Yep. And the goal whenever we're storing seeds is we want to keep the seeds having as low as possible of a metabolic rate while we're storing them. We want them to conserve as many of their food stores for when they're really going to need it when they go through the germination process. We don't want them to prematurely use them all up, which we'll talk more about in a moment.
And and I was just thinking about that little coat that we're the little lunchbox that we're imagining.
Yes.
The more of a lunchbox that a seed has, those are the seeds that oftentimes are very difficult to get to germinate because that
exactly
is so thick. Yeah,
exactly. Are there any seeds with a particularly short shelf life that I should be aware of? So I know there are definitely seeds when we're ordering for the store that we're really careful about and we don't want to order until we're ready to pack them. So what seeds come to mind for you, Lisa?
sure. First and foremost is larkspur. I know that's like, as you mentioned earlier, when we were discussing this, feverfew is one that can be just, it's those ones that we say, gosh, that seed is kind of hard to start. Like one year you have a great success, and then the next year, maybe not such a great success. So feverfew and larkspur. As I mentioned earlier, tomatoes are a great poster child. I literally have germinated 14-year-old big beef tomato seeds. And so tomatoes are at the opposite end of the spectrum. And I think even any seed that's pelleted in any way, that definitely has a shorter shelf life. And when we do get pelleted seeds, we do our best to try to use them all up that season. Which ones have you thought of?
I thought of the same as you, the larkspur, feverfew, straw flower. I would
Yes,
throw in there.
straw flowers for sure.
And like you said, anything pelleted. These are all just things that we're careful about when we're ordering for the store, and they're best fresh. They have a shorter shelf life than some other things.
Yes.
All right, when should I buy my seed? If I buy my seed in the fall, will it still be good for planting in the spring? We hear this question a lot, especially at this time of year.
Yes, for sure. So literally, if you are storing your seeds properly, you can purchase seeds really anytime if you're storing them properly to use for at the very minimum for the next season. Those few that we just mentioned that kind of we know that they may have a shorter shelf life. You may not want to overbuy those, but in general, we store our seeds. I mean, we will do 2 or 3 years sometimes, especially if there's going to be a shortage of a seed. You hear the rumblings, I'll buy extra seed. I try to buy in 3-year windows is what I look at, because we store our seeds properly.
Okay, let's go on to the next question because it's related. So how much seed should I buy? Should I buy just enough for the upcoming growing season or for multiple seasons? So you kind of just touched on this, but.
Sure. I think that certainly there is an economic savings when you buy larger packages. Like if you buy one of our jumbo packs versus a regular size pack of seed. I totally think for people that are committed gardeners, buy the jumbo pack. And if it lasts you 2 seasons and you store it properly, it should be fine. So when I am trying to figure out how much seed to buy, it's literally y'all sitting down as a grower. This isn't quite so important when you're a home gardener, but when you're a farmer, you need to be sure that you have more than enough seed to plant the crop that you intended that you're going to grow, right? So when I am figuring out how many seeds I need, I do my seed starting plan typically in January for the whole next year. And then I would just literally go through that calendar and add up how many transplants of each individual plant I was going to purchase. And then I multiply for indoor seed starting, I multiply that by 2 to 3 times at least. I will say that I go high instead of going low because nothing is worse than not having enough seeds.
And we will talk about ordering seed for transplants and direct seeding in the next question. So
okay. Yeah, so you just multiply by what the recommended number of seeds are by how many seeds you're going to plant. I mean, it's literally that simple.
Yep. And like Lisa was saying, so for me as a home gardener, I am definitely okay with ordering more seed, taking advantage of the cost savings, knowing that at some point, some of the seed might not germinate or I might not get through all of that. Because I'm a home gardener rather than a farmer like Lisa, if something doesn't end up working out, I can just put something else there. I'm not depending on a very specific crop being there. And when I'm going to be doing that, if it's a seed that I know I'm going to be using a lot of, what I like to do is look up viability charts. These will list typically a range of the shelf life of certain seeds. Usually it's when they're stored under optimal conditions, so do keep that in mind. But I will look at a few different charts and I will kind of take the worst case scenario and I'll see, is that worst case scenario, am I okay with that? How many years worth do I want to order at that? And that's kind of the process I use, but I definitely order multiple years at a time because I know I'm going to be storing them properly.
Yeah, that's incentive to do that too, right?
Yes. It is. All right. So how much extra seed should I order as insurance if I'm going to be direct seeding or growing transplants? So direct seeding, you also just need extra because you have to put more out and you're going to be thinning it. But how many seeds do you need to order extra if you're going to be direct seeding or growing transplants?
So when I do direct seeding math, I multiply 5. I mean, you know how many feet of flowers you want in a bed. And we oversow. So I typically would multiply my direct seeding plant want times 5 or 6 times. That's how many extra seeds, because if you want success as a direct sower, you have to overseed. You have to overplant and then thin, because it just doesn't work out. We love ants. Ants are really very good bugs, but they are the number one movers of seeds. And so that's higher. But with transplants, 2 to 3 times the number of transplants I want, is because I start twice as many seeds in soil blocks or plug trays as plants I want in the end.
And we have mentioned before in previous podcasts that this is why it's so important to know how you're going to be planting a seed before you order. You should know before you order, am I direct seeding or am I planting transplants? Because that is going to affect the quantity of seed that you order.
And it's very overwhelming when you're ordering seeds, right? But it literally comes down to just doing a little bit of math.
Well, I hope you found those seed buying tips helpful. And if you want to hear the rest of our conversation, feel free to check out the full episode, which again was episode 11. This podcast is brought to you by the Gardener's Workshop. So if you find yourself in need of any seeds, tools, supplies, or online courses, feel free to check out the selection at thegardenersworkshop.com. Thanks so much for joining us today. Please be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And until next time, happy growing.